debate event, which is titled Living in a Future City. My name is Jake Allcock, and I'm a PhD student in the Department of Sociological Studies at the University of Sheffield. I'm also a scholar for the Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures, for whom this event is hosted by. For those who do not know, the Grantham Centre is a collaboration between the Grantham Foundation of Protection of the Environment and the University of Sheffield. At the Grantham Centre, experts from academia, business and policy come together to create a sustainable future. The sustainability research that is at the heart of the Grantham Centre seeks to create knowledge and connect to policy debates on how to build a fairer world and preserve natural resources for future generations. So I'd like to thank them for making this event possible. This event is also partnered with Better Points. Use your QR code you can also scan, which is on the slides right now, and get 500 points in the Better Points app. You can either donate or spend them and get free tea and coffee at either like a US cafe, which most of the cafes on the University Sheffield campus do have. As mentioned, this event is part of the Festival Debate. The goals of these events are to create a place where we can connect to each other, to our communities, to the institutions, and new ideas that shape our lives, to do the conversations that start to change. For our talk today, it will be chaired by my fellow Grantham scholar, Fiona McBride, who is also a PhD researcher at University of Sheffield in the Energy Institute. We also have 3 fantastic speakers today who will all give us a wide range of discussions on sustainable urban design based on their experiences and expertises. I'd like to thank them for making time for us to present today. So first of all, we have Dr. Tanzil Shafiq, who is a lecturer of urban design and the director of postgraduate programs at the University of Sheffield School of Architecture. We also have Green Councillor Gilligan Kubo, who is part of the Sheffield City Council. I'd also like to congratulate on her also recently re-winning her seat. And finally, we have Dr. Ryan Bellinson, who is a senior research fellow at the University College London and also a community innovation strategist for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. For our event today, the core discussion will be centered around the challenges, but also the opportunities posed by sustainable urban design. There will be a significant focus on how public engagement can be used to achieve these goals and how the different areas in sustainable urban design have already been achieved, or if they can be achieved as well. We will want to centre this discussion around how this can take place in Sheffield or the South Yorkshire region, but what also can be learned from other successful projects that have taken place in other cities. Our event will start with our 3 panelists giving a brief presentation about their experiences and or research about sustainable urban design. This will be followed by a couple of questions for each of our panelists from our chair. Finally, we'll have an audience Q&A to end the session. There's a Q&A feature in Google Meet where you can put your questions anytime during the session, and also for any questions, and vote for any questions that you might like as well. To access that Q&A feature, you can just go to the bottom right, where there should be a little triangle, square, and circle. And then when you click on that, there should be a little point that says Q&A, and you click on that, and then you can put your questions through there. As I say, the question will read out the top voted questions for our panelists during this Q&A. So when you put them in, please also make sure to put the name of the panelists in the question as well, if you have a direct question for them. Sadly, Tanzil will have to leave us briefly after his presentation, but hopefully you should be able to join us again during the Q&A, so still feel free to put questions to him. So, without further ado, and without me talking, I will now pass it off to our chair, Fiona, who will guide us through the rest of the session.
Thanks very much, Jake. Hi, everybody. I'm Fiona. I'm also a PhD researcher here at the University of Sheffield. I'm going to be your chair for today, which means I will introduce all our speakers. And then when we get to the question and answer aspect, I'll be reading out your questions. So please pop them in the Q&A as soon as you think of them, and give me lots of questions to ask. So let's get started. Tanzil, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can pop up your slides if that's all right, and then we'll get on with the introduction. So our first speaker today is Dr. Tanzil Shafiq, who's a lecturer at Sheffield University School of Architecture, although he's previously worked at the University of Melbourne and the University of Arkansas as well. And his work is really focused around adaptations and transformations as a result of climate change, and urbanism, architecture, and informal planning. And he's been involved in all kinds of things, including the Platform for Just Housing and the Bangladesh Climate Alliance, as well as authoring lots of different research. But today he's going to be giving us a presentation titled Another Sheffield's Already Here, Learning with Nature, Justice in the City. So let's hand over to Tanzil. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? I think I was just muted.
Yeah, we can hear
Okay.
you. Thank you.
And the slides are okay.
All working.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me. I mean, it's a great pleasure to be here. I have a tendency to keep talking forever, so I'll just start a timer so that I can time myself. So that's about 15 minutes. Okay. So when I was looking at the title, Living in a Future City, and then this idea about focusing on Sheffield, so I thought I'd just slightly deviate from my research mainly, which is to do with informal settlements in Global South. But there is a different hat that I wear, which is I also have been running the urban design program here in the School of Architecture for the last 3 years. So I thought I'll just present something from there. The core message is we have been working with local organizations in Sheffield as part of our ethos of a community engaged pedagogy. So, and we have been imagining different futures with them. So in this lecture, I'll very quickly present to you a few projects that we have been doing in the last semester, last 2 semesters, and I thought that would be a good way of thinking about why another Sheffield is already here. So just a brief big background. I mean, so this is the MA, Masters of Arts in Urban Design. It's a 1-year program. And as you can see in these pictures, there's a lot of focus in the way that participation with local communities and participation with stakeholders is a key feature of the way that we conceive of the program. So these are all different activities during the process of the designs program in which the students engage with the stakeholders as part of their design process. So this is key. But before I get to that, I just want to sort of clarify or sort of like, put my stakes on the ground as to what are our ethos. Like, what is the philosophy behind the way that we have structured the design program, in the sense that how do we interpret urban design? So one particular concept that we have really put our focus on is this notion of care. So we see the city as a multiscalar, multiple networks of care that allows people to thrive, and people, human and non-human, and so it's not just about people, but this concept of ecologies of care sits at the core. So when we talk about urban design, we don't talk about really physical structures only. So we don't talk about like 3 buildings, and we don't talk about what we really essentially talk about are relationalities. So what are the sort of relations between things that allow care, or currently, how does it produce uncare? How can you have a city that doesn't care about you in your everyday day-to-day life? And how can, as a designer, we can go and then rethink those relationships? So that sits at the core. What are the things that sort of like undergird that notion is, one is the concept of the planetary. So when we say that we are engaged in Sheffield, we don't mean in the sense that our concern is only Sheffield. We are really concerned about the planetary, the issues of climate change, because we see, as you can see in this quote, urban design can no longer evade its responsibilities for attending to the conflicted relation between the global, and then between, the way that we engage in particular localities such as Sheffield as a city. So we are all sort of interconnected in this world, and what we do here will impact everywhere else, and vice versa. So in that sense, we are concerned at that planetary scale as well. The second key aspect that that sort of like shapes our ethos is we don't start from a positivist attitude of we design because we know everything. And I know that's how often architects are seen, that they're the ones with the design. They come and impose that design on the city, whether people like it or not, that's really not their concern. So we want to turn that over, really. And then we start from this notion of unknowability. If a city is all about all these different relations between you and your neighbor, between you and your daughter and your school, and millions of relationalities, then no one would be able to say that they can know a city in its entirety. So there is a radical unknowability in the way that cities are conceived in our program, which is why we're not too concerned about getting to a stage of know-it-all master planner. So we don't even use the word master plan in the way that we think of urban design, in the way that we talk about projects. We talk about interventions, we talk about catalyst projects, we talk about facilitation, but we don't talk about this grand scale, grand narrative of things as if we can know everything. So these are the sort of like the two. And then lastly, of course, as I've mentioned this before, this idea of locality, the idea of situating a practice in a very particular place and a particular set of issues and particular set of concerns, that is central. So I just want to read, I don't want to beat my own drum too much, but I just thought it would be great if I read a testimonial from one of our community partners. So one particular partner that I'll focus today that we work with is a local cooperative. Many of you may know them. It's called Regather. So they're an organic food cooperative based in Highfield, but they have a farm in Moss Valley. And we have been working with them for the last 3 years. So they're sort of like one of the key community partners. So this is what Gareth Roberts, who runs Regather, had to say about our program. Participating in the MA in urban design has proven to be an excellent opportunity. But the point that I want to stress is it enabled a fresh take on our work and opening up new insights. In our experience, this type of opportunity for a deeper two-way integration between the university and the wider society is essential in enabling effective collaboration and knowledge exchange. And that is really at the root of the projects that I'm going to show you now, that moving beyond this idea that urban designers will propose a future, in terms of, oh, here you go, these are the construction drawings. We conceive urban design, the projects that I'm going to show you, co-designed with the community. They are more as activators. They activate dreams, desires. They allow people to discuss these things. They allow people to see a future that is already possible, that is already here, but no one really put a picture to that imagination. So we kind of like strive to bring those relations, into effect, into an effective medium, such as you'll see. So this is Regather. We work with them, as I said. Let me check the time. Okay, so we work with them, as I said. So in the last 1 year, we have been working on this concept of just nature. So, and then we have been focusing on 3 particular locations in Glidless Valley. And the big question we asked in the studio was, how can we think of just transition in relation to nature? Even though this picture of Glidless Valley is an epitome of natural beauty, nature is not accessed equitably by all. So there is deep-seated injustices in the way that access to nature, access to amenities, it's unevenly distributed in most cities, and also in Sheffield in particular. So how can we reimagine certain spots, certain places in this Glidless Valley otherwise? So we worked with Regather to identify some of these key sites that could be reimagined differently. So for example, one of the sites, it's slightly outside of Glidless Valley, but in close proximity, is Norton Nurseries next to Graves Park. I'm sure everyone in Sheffield knows Graves Park. And we explored the theme of horticulture and community there. And then there's a disused pub building. So and we explored the notion of health and social care. And then There is a demolished school site at the intersection of Constable Road and Blackstock Road. And then we interrogated the concept of play and nature and how they can come together. So I'll show you three projects from there. So the first one is a reconceptualization of this northern nurseries, the disused glass houses and that entire area, which is right now used as a waste transfer station. And what a waste to use it as a waste transfer station, right? It's located in, the site can be used in so many different ways. I mean, the students, one particular aspect that I wanted to stress is, so these imaginations that we talk or keep, we're talking about, these are done in consultation with communities. We do participatory events, we do participatory workshops. So it's not really coming from us alone. So the imagination, the ideas of what it can be is actually co-produced. Secondly, this is all really preceded by research. So as you can see, a lot of mapping, a lot of research and trying to identify, what are the key strengths of the site, what are the key weaknesses. So all of that sort of leads to a manifesto. So on the right-hand side, you can see a very close-up of, I'm not sure, is this a cabbage? But grow local, be radical. So this manifesto was about how we can promote sort of a local, urban agriculture, but as a therapeutic device. So this is what the title is called, From Soil to Soul, Gardening for Well-Being. So here the glass houses were reimagined as a form of a therapeutic hub. So you can see like different activities happening. And I'm just showing you like really brief snippets. This is part of the larger set of panels. The students, they worked out the business plan. So working with Regather, we worked out how this would be feasible, who are the key stakeholders, which is my point, that this is not just a random fantasy. We have been able to work out the viability of this as a business case. Like, how does it work with Graves Park? So the students have really identified the reality on the ground, and then have proposed certain these ideas. So this one was about a therapeutic training center, but where people come to, elderly people, they come to learn about urban agriculture through horticulture. They seed propagation and all of that. So it works as a pedagogical structure as well. Another project was the John O'Gon pub, and how that was proposed to be converted to what we call a nature hub. So this was a physical manifestation of social prescribing. So this social prescribing, this hub was rethought as a place where there are all these different activities. So, hiking, dog walking, children's play, how all of that can be sort of like seen as a set of prescription. So Glidless Valley is reimagined, and we utilize sort of like the natural beauty and the natural potential of the site to see that as a place where people would actually go and stop. And then, you go into Nature Hub, get a dose of, 5 days of walking, or, you get all of that through a digital infrastructure as well as a physical one. So this was conceived as that. And these are some of the pictures, some of these imaginations of what it facilitates, and how some of these places which are not active right now are activated. I have 1 minute, so I'll just very quickly go over the last project. The last project was about engaging the youth with nature through gameplay. So again, this was the discarded site. You can see right in the middle there. And then the idea was how to engage the youth in sort of like getting them interested in nature. So this group of students, they came up with something like a Monopoly, the game. So they called it the Grow Poly. And then they literally worked it out. It's like a board game that you can play. And it's sort of like an augmented reality that you get points by actually playing it out in the actual natural setting. So that, you can see here on the right that it's how it works and how you get points. So again, engaging with the youth in a way that is not sort of conventional in that sense, but that's very doable right now. So this was all part of an exhibition that we did, in March. This is open to the public, but not maybe as elaborately publicized, but the idea was that we want to reach out with these ideas to the public to start these imaginations. If you spare me 60 seconds, I'll just have a video that shows just 1 second, a clip of that exhibition. But the video is not playing. As usual, technical glitches. But in any case, I mean, I'm over my time in any case, but that's about it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tanzil. As I said before, if you've got any questions, which I'm sure lots of you do, because that was absolutely fascinating, gave us loads of different examples to think about, please pop them in the Q&A section in the little triangle and square icon at the bottom of the screen. We will move on now to hearing from our next speaker. So again, put those questions at the bottom of the screen in that Q&A function, and have a look at the other questions that are appearing there. Let us know which ones we should be asking as we go as well. Our next speaker is Councillor Christine Gilligan Kubo. She is a councillor for Sheffield City Council, member of the Green Party, and stands for Hillsborough Ward. She's first elected in 2021, re-elected this year, so she's been a councillor for a little while and can tell us what that involves maybe. But before she was a councillor, she was a university lecturer researching sustainability and responsible business practice. So lots of relevant experience there. She's still a member of the Committee for Transport, Regeneration and Climate Policy, which covers lots of sustainability related urban things like planning policy, flood protection, and sustainable city approaches. And she's brought forward all kinds of motions to Sheffield City Council, but one that we wanted to highlight was one around promoting renewable energy in new and existing developments. So that's things like local area energy plans and solar panels on council-owned buildings. She's also responsible for us still having the 52A bus route, which if you live in Sheffield, you're probably very grateful for, especially if you live in the Crooks or Hillsborough area, because it was under threat at one point. And she's also continuing to campaign on lots of sustainability related issues, such as school parking, community support groups and clean air zones. So I'll hand over to Christine.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I must just say I'm not solely responsible for the 52A, but I was putting pressure on people that were. So, so as you said, I am a councillor, and I am going to talk today a bit about what is actually happening in Sheffield and a little bit about a flight of fancy as what I'd like to happen as a Green councillor, and I'd like to see happen. And there will be a little bit of politics in, but I'll try to keep that to a minimum. So as a Green Party councillor, the first thing I want to say is if we really want a truly sustainable future, we need system change. And I'm sure that the tinkering around the edges that we're doing at the moment isn't enough. We're facing a climate emergency, as we know. We're facing a nature emergency. 1 in 6 of our species are at risk. And we're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. So whatever we do in our cities, we need to seriously consider the climate and the nature crises as we develop our urban areas. So what I want to talk about are 3 areas. Hopefully I'll have time. Transport, housing, and our local plan or the city development. So I'll be only able to give you a very brief overview of what I would like to see and what is possible, I hope. Transport. I'll start with transport. If we want a truly sustainable place where people can thrive and an equitable future, we need good public transport. We need to make it easy for people to travel around the city without a car, and that's absolutely essential. Over 20% of people in Sheffield don't have a car. But reducing the need for cars isn't just good for the 20% of people that don't have a car. If we get our transport options correct and we can reduce reliance on cars, but still enable people to get where they want to be, where they need to be, this will free up road space for community use. People can use the streets for things other than parking metal boxes. The roads and the neighbourhoods will be safer. There'll be nicer places to live. Children might be able to play in the streets again. So as you mentioned in your introduction, thank you, I'm very keen that we get school streets everywhere around the city so that everybody has a safe area around their school when they're travelling to school. We want more and more children to be able to get to school without going in the car, so they can walk or cycle. So these are some of the key elements we need for a sustainable future city. We need more cycle lanes. We need more routes where it's easy and nice to walk. So I suggest that we would need more out of town parking, so people coming into the city don't need to drive into the centre. And there's plenty of cities in the UK that have out of town parking and you can just get a bus in. I mean, we do have a free electric bus going around the city centre now, taking you where you want to go, which is a brilliant first step. Maybe have more of those. So adequate public transport is my number one. And I think a low traffic future will provide clean air, as I said, safe streets, vibrant communities, less congestion, encouraging people to walk and cycle and increase their physical activity. And of course, this will reduce health inequalities and reduce greenhouse emissions. We have to recognise that transport is responsible for 26% of emissions in this city. And another sad statistic is Sheffield has the highest rate of road traffic collisions involving children in all the core English cities. So yes, more buses, more trams. I don't know what the transport of the future will be, but we need more of it in our cities so people can get around easily, walk or cycle. So that's my number one wish. The second area I'll talk about, which ties in with the local plan and the city development, is housing. And again, if we want a sustainable, equitable future, we need good quality, net zero social housing that is equitable, affordable and accessible. A truly sustainable city provides good quality homes for all, not just those that can afford to buy. So I'm going to be a little critical of the way we build homes at the moment because I don't think we're meeting future needs. We are not building net zero carbon neutral homes at the moment. Why not? Is it the planning framework? Part of it is, yes, the national planning framework, which is set by national government, not by local councils, doesn't have a requirement for net zero. As local councillors, we want net zero homes, but we can't require them because it's not in the national planning framework. We can ask developers if they build net zero, but because house building is a profitable industry, it's more expensive at the moment to build net zero. They prefer to build houses that don't meet the needs of the future. So that's one of the areas I'd like system change. Another area I'd like, excuse me, system change is end the right to buy, which this is a political point, I apologise. But if we build more social housing as a council, they can be sold off. And the price that we get for those doesn't cover the cost of replacement homes. Also, many of the homes that are sold off become private rentals. And once they're in the private market, the rents can be put up. And what happens is Sheffield City Council and the government end up paying these private rents in housing benefit and universal credit. This money, this excess rents that we're paying in this system of housing as a commodity means we haven't got the money to spend on retrofitting all our council homes and our private homes, making homes cleaner, energy efficient, warmer, less damp, nicer places to live. So there's a lot we need to do to our homes in this city. We've got leaky homes. And as we know, there's a crisis with damp. So we really need to look at how we can get at least the current housing stock up to sustainable levels. We need solar energy on all buildings that are available. We need heat pumps in our homes, but they need to be insulated. And this needs money to do this. We need finance to do it. So these are really important issues that it's very difficult as a council to tackle at the moment. Another area that I'm very interested in and would like to see is permeable paving and permeable drives. People put in these wonderful looking, I don't know what they're called, driveways that are totally impermeable. and the rainwater just rushes off them, and they might look beautiful. I want to say, let's not have neatness in our city. Let's have a bit more wildness. So let's have permeable paving. This would help alleviate flooding because the rainwater would soak into the ground. The vegetation that can sneak around the edges and through the permeable paving can encourage wildlife, insects and things like that. So rather than having a city full of bare concrete, I'd like to see a city full of greenery and wildlife. And so this kind of discussion about housing fits very much into our local plan. You may or may not know, we have submitted a local plan to the planning inspector for approval. We as a city have decided that all new housing should be on brownfield developments because we have quite a lot in the city and we want to keep our wonderful green belt. We're very proud in Sheffield of being a city with plenty of greenery, and we want to keep it that way. And I'm going to be critical of developers here. I apologise if there's any developers listening, but we put in this plan to the inspectorate and it went to public consultation so anybody can comment on it. And what happened was that some developers, not all of them, I'm not tarring them all with the same brush, objected to the brownfield sites. And if the planning inspector upholds the objection and we are not providing enough sites for building, we might have to build on the green belt. So I think developers have an incentive to not build sustainable homes at the moment. So that's another part of the system change I would like to see. And I would like to see that we develop homes in a way that meets the needs of people and nature and the climate, rather than the needs of commercial enterprise. So if we get our homes on the brownfield sites, this will increase urban density and people will be going, oh, that will be a horrible place to live. We don't want to live in skyscrapers. But let's reimagine these tower blocks and these tall buildings. Let's make them all beautiful and let's make them all green. Why don't we have living walls, green walls on these buildings? Why don't we have roof gardens? I don't know if you've ever been on the top of a tall building and looked at the skyline in Sheffield. There's plenty of empty roof space. Why don't we have roof gardens? Or at the very least, put solar panels on the tops of all these buildings so we're generating our own local energy and reducing the reliance on big corporations to provide our power. So although we might have increased urban density, people can still live in beautiful buildings and have green space. Instead of all the concrete all around us, let's have more green space. We're trying to do a bit of that in Sheffield. You might have noticed the grey to green developments along Bridge Street, along the canal. These not only make an area more attractive, they help to prevent flooding because, again, the rainwater doesn't run straight off into the rivers. It soaks into the ground and filters through slowly. And the vegetation absorbs pollution so that we're not polluting the rivers. So we must make more. We are doing more grey to green. We'll have that on Fargate soon, down the centre of Fargate. So these things can make cities look a lot more beautiful. But I also want more community gardens, more little corners of green space where communities can grow food or plant apple trees, or just put a chair out on a summer day and enjoy the nice weather. Another thing we are doing as a council is we are reducing our mowing regimes of the greenery that we have. We are letting areas grow and have wildflowers. You might have noticed some people might be going, oh, it's looking a bit scruffy. There's a few wildflowers growing here. That's wonderful. That's what we want. So we are reducing mowing regimes, letting more wildflowers grow, and we're reducing the use of pesticides to encourage nature into our city centres. So I want to see a city centre that's busy, that's thriving. It's not full of cars parked in boxes, little metal boxes on the pavements, but it's a vibrant place where people want to be. It's alive with the sound of birds and insects and beautiful places for people to pass through or enjoy. So some of our vision in Sheffield is we are trying to do that, but there are a lot of, as I've said, a lot of difficulties to get where we want to be in terms of finance and laws. But I would like to see Sheffield transformed from a concrete jungle to a living, vibrant green space. So I'll stop there and I'll take questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christine. Just a reminder to pop those questions in the Q&A function. I'm sure, again, I can see some questions coming in, and I've got some questions too. So thank you very much, Christine. We're going to hear from our final speaker, Dr. Ryan Bellinson, before we move on to addressing everybody's questions at once, because we might well have questions that different speakers might have different perspectives on. Just a quick note to say, Christine, thank you. You absolutely are allowed to talk politics at this event, and attendees, you're allowed to ask politics questions as well. So please, it's debate. We're here to talk about all kinds of things. There's no need to, leave that one out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to our final speaker for today. That is Dr. Ryan Bellinson. He's an urban researcher who works across the intersection of cities, climate change, community engagement, and governance and innovation. So a whole mixture of different things. That's going to link quite nicely, I think, with some of the other stuff we've heard about today already. And he's a senior research fellow in cities, climate and innovation at University College London, in their Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, and a community innovation strategist for Oregon development of environmental quality. And his work is looking at an embedded research project with Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So we're hearing about all our neighbours today, exploring about innovative public participation methods that could support meaningful and just local climate policy development. So Ryan will explore, hopefully, why engaging the public is important for the transition towards sustainable, inclusive and equitable cities, and help us highlight an example of what this form of engagement could look like. Ryan, I will stop sharing my screen if you've got some slides. You should be able to press present and get them up for us.
Okay, let's see if I can figure this out. Go. Okay, can you all see this?
Yeah, we can see that and we can hear you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's really a pleasure to join you all and to contribute to the conversation. What Tanzil and Christine both shared was really fascinating, and hopefully I can just add to the discussion. I did my PhD at the University of Sheffield. This work I'll be speaking about comes from my time at University of Sheffield, so it's also fun to kind of be coming home, if you will. So my name's Ryan Bellinson, and I'm excited to talk to you today about how we can transition towards creating the type of sustainable, inclusive, equitable urban design we've been hearing about so far today. I've been working at the intersection of public policy and climate action for quite some time as a researcher and civil servant, and today I do that at UCL and the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. So let's just situate this transition before we really dive into an example of it in Greater Manchester. This transition, unfortunately, is contentious. Society is facing enormous challenges where cynical, I would say, politicians are pitting one group against another. So whether it's the climate crisis, those first photos are youth climate activists that are getting pushback from different groups in society. So whether we're thinking about the climate crisis, affordable housing shortage, cost of living crisis, political polarization, we're living in highly contentious political times. And if we unwittingly address these crises in silos, we're doomed to fail. So that's what Christine was talking about, systems change. We have to think about how these different crises come together. And this is just another way of thinking about systems change, or how we bring those silos together. So a colleague of mine from UN Habitat captured this in saying that we won't be successful in addressing any of our biggest, most complex problems unless we're able to first recognize the interconnectedness of everything. Everything is interconnected. We can't make this transition to a future sustainable city without simultaneously thinking about all of the interconnected social and economic inequalities that exist. And I argue community engagement and thinking about how we deeply engage and empower urban stakeholders in decision making is a really important and effective method for recognizing and understanding the interconnections between different crises that we're trying to address. So I want to tell you a quick story from Greater Manchester. This story is about a policy design process. So the outcomes of that process, I don't want to get into, or we can during the Q&A, but I won't focus on that in this discussion. The policy design process, I wouldn't put this up as a panacea. It's not a kind of golden example of how every city should think about designing this transition to a sustainable city. But it's how Greater Manchester tried to shape their transition through a new lens. And I think there's some interesting lessons we can learn. So in 2017, Andy Burnham was elected as the first Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester. And after being pushed by environmental and climate activists, he had a pledge within his manifesto back in 2017 to dramatically increase Greater Manchester's ambition, climate change, aligned with the science-based target, and developed with diverse city stakeholders. So the civil servants, after Andy was elected, began conceptualizing how they would develop this policy. And as they were doing that, they kind of harkened back to Greater Manchester's long-standing self-image as a pioneer, dating back to the Industrial Revolution, and sought to kind of pitch what they were embarking toward, this new climate strategy, as a pathway towards being a new pioneer, a pioneer in the space of climate justice. So the science-based target wing of the policy design process focused on a big piece of research done by the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research at the University of Manchester. What's important just to note here is Greater Manchester's carbon budget, that's what this is, a carbon budget, was much more ambitious than what policymakers thought was possible within the kind of best case scenario model. And this led to a lot of rhetoric around an innovation gap. There was a need for the city to have openness for innovation to enable reductions in emissions to go faster and further than what was initially thought possible. So this was kind of the science piece. And I want to focus on the city stakeholder piece, the community engagement piece, story of the strategy development process. So this aspect, the community engagement, were really centered through the lens of co-production. Co-productive policy design was at the ethos of developing this climate strategy. And co-production was utilized as a way to enable diverse city stakeholders from across the very large city region to collectively develop a policy that would charter a pathway towards what Carlotta Perez, the economist, calls the green good life. So green stuff, not being done for the sake of green, but being done for the sake of just being the best decision, making people's lives better. So through this part of the policy development process, Greater Manchester Combined Authority assessed policy options that could be taken to reduce emissions by deeply engaging the public through an ongoing co-productive dialogue to determine how collective action could lead to a more inclusive, sustainable, just city that benefited those that were historically most left behind. So there are different ways of engaging the public. So you can see here on the left-hand side, this is a design charrette with transportation practitioners. There were design charrettes with different expert groups that kind of looked at the intersections between one expert group's sector with other sectors and kind of how those interconnections could really be germinated and fostered to create really interesting action. There were appreciative inquiry workshops with young people and advocacy groups, that's shown in the middle, to kind of bring in lots of new ideas around what what climate action even looks like or should look like. What does it mean? There were non-directed, facilitated strategic design workshops with residents to look at other wider stakeholder groups, to think about in kind of everyday people's lives, how could climate action better people's lives? What would that look like? So there were about 50 of these workshops. There were lots and lots and lots of people that were engaged through different deep engagement methods that focused on co-production. This all happened during the first phase of the policy design process, and this type of engagement has continued through different phases of Greater Manchester's climate strategy, which was launched in 2019, called the 5-Year Environment Plan. Now, this 5-year environment plan target for Greater Manchester to become carbon neutral by 2038. That was in line with the work Tanzil Centre did on the carbon budget for the city region. Now, within this 5-year environment plan, what I think is so exciting and interesting, there are over 60 policy actions that can be directly traced to the deep engagement methods I just spoke about. So ideas that came from those different workshops, different co-production methods, directly are kind of translated into this 5-year environment plan. So by enabling stakeholders from across the city region to shape the strategy and really hold the pen, write the strategy, the transition is more likely to be inclusive and equitable and just, because the needs of different types of people are being considered when shaping actions within the strategy. So it's not something that's kind of typically done in local government strategy design, where you have civil servants or technocrats that are developing a strategy from one particular perspective, however well-intentioned that perspective is. You're always going to miss certain constituencies. You're always going to forget about certain challenges or intersections. But by bringing lots of different stakeholders together, you get a much more dynamic picture of the world, and can situate a strategy, a vision for the future within that more nimble, dynamic, holistic picture of the world. So just a quick message from a civil servant, Mark Atherton, who was the head of environment for GMCA during this process. He kind of talked afterward about the struggle of wanting to have a strategy that really is inclusive of the public's views, while as a civil servant, not necessarily feeling settled that you're going to be able to deliver on what people want. So he said he felt morally conflicted about recommending to the cabinet of GMCA, the mayor of GMCA, what we, the individuals responsible for implementing a decision, think is doable. So what this person or what this person represents, the civil servants, think is reasonable or think they'll be able to achieve, rather than what the science determines as necessary and the public is demanding. So there's this tension. As a policy officer, a civil servant, are you holding the pen and just being the conduit for a wider group of stakeholders that exist within your city? Or are you kind of closing debate in some way? That is kind of what I think community engagement can enable. Deep forms of community engagement can enable this moving away from doing what one set of people think is doable, towards setting out a more bold, ambitious vision for the future. And I'm running out of time, so I'll just glance over this quite quickly. By taking that approach, thinking about how the civil service, how local government can co-produce a strategy with the public, it can lead to really transformative outcomes. So this is the B network. You're probably all familiar with this. Transportation was a huge part of the 5-year environment plan, this climate strategy. And to enable the usage of public transportation just being the obvious choice for residents to make rather than driving. It had to not just be something that was mandated or seen as the green thing to do, it had to be the easy thing to do. And that's where the B network came from. Actually, funny story, the name B Network came from one of those deep engagement workshops that I shared earlier with a group of residents from Wigan that was suggested by someone there. Now this B Network is something that is incredibly difficult to achieve. This is a kind of urban design process, a mini Holland, if you will, that's being taken forward in the city region. And this was all enabled through taking that co-productive approach and doing not what was seen as achievable by the civil servants, but what the public was demanding. So I really appreciate you having me today. I really appreciate you hearing about this story from Greater Manchester. And I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Ryan. That was absolutely fascinating. Once again, reminder to please pop your questions in the Q&A function. It's down the bottom right of the screen with the little shaped symbol, and then you just select questions and answers. We've got some questions popping up in there already, but I will get us started with some questions as well. So to begin with, question for Tanzil. How do you imagine we might see citizens and residents and potentially designers, planners, construction companies making changes to our houses in the future as we adjust to climate change?
So I mean, I think again there is like no single answer to that. I mean, there are multiple things that can be done. So obviously in our School of Architecture, we have been looking at a lot of retrofitting, a lot of net zero conversions, a lot of using existing building stock. One key idea is, buildings overall contributes to 39% of the, greenhouse gas emissions. This is, major architectural figures right now in the world, the tune has changed in the way that architecture is perceived. So, so for example, there's famous French architect who got a very big award in architecture 2 years ago. And then they said, building at something new is absolutely the last thing to do. So it's about retrofit. It's about, fixing things. It's about looking at what we got. It's about valuing all of that. So of course, in terms of how we will come about to do those things, I mean, it again depends on sort of, assessing what we have and what's usable and how much is possible. So, understanding that existing stock would be vital. I echo Christine's point that, I mean, it needs sort of like a radical everyday engagement rather than a slow, because it's just a question of, I mean, if you were on a car that's going off a cliff, you wouldn't be really talking about the color of the seats. You wouldn't be talking about leather or non-leather. I mean, first things first. So I think that urgency needs to come seeping through in the everyday actions, in the everyday way that we talk about, ordinary things. So, how everything can become very climate responsive would be key. So, when you were talking about all these different stakeholders, construction companies, students, universities, I mean, you start to see that everyone plays a role. So then it falls upon everyone to assess what was their role, to develop that critical thinking, and to look for alternatives. Because I think one of the key problem is the status quo is made to seem like that it's the only option. So, I mean, I don't know if you know the work by Mark Fisher. It talks about capitalist realism. It's the idea that there's only singular way of doing things in the world. And I think moving beyond that in terms of buildings, in terms of how we build, how we conceive of what cities are. And, Christine talked about this, metal boxes and how we conceive everything through them right now. And it doesn't have to be. I don't want to, keep on going, but I just want, when Christina was talking about that, I remember this whole idea that cities need to be centered around the car, it came from a few architects who were sponsored by General Motors, in the 30s and 40s, and they did huge exhibitions about the future cities. And I give this talk a lot, where this was projected as an utopia of where every family has 4 cars, and everyone sort of like bought into that dream. But prior to that, 10,000 years of cities, no one really had this idea of, in that way. So cities have been different, and it can be different again. So I'll stop at that for now. But happy to, talk later about it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. It was so much different stuff going into all of this. My next question is for Christine. Having worked both in academia and as a councillor, how well do these two different spheres kind of link together, and are there any kind of areas where they clash?
That's a tricky question. I just want to say thanks to Tanzil for his comments about, car and the status quo and what we perceive as the best. And we do need to change that. We're in a different reality now. So, yeah. How does academia gives you the knowledge, it gives you the access to information that is really important, that you can bring back to your discussions around what is done in a council. So that's very important. I think what is difficult about being a councillor, and this ties in with both of the other two speakers, is you somehow have to bring the public with you. Even if you have great ideas and you can get around some of the roadblocks that are there because of national legislation or anything, you've also got to convince the public. And again, as Tanzil was referring to, we have these idealized images of what we're expecting, and we need to change that. And as councillors, it's very hard. So I did a lot of work around the same areas Ryan did about public engagement and how you bring people with you. And I think we need to have much more citizen assembly type places where people come together and they get the knowledge that they need to understand why we need to change, and then let them decide how they want to change it. Because I think at the moment, people kind of hear the words climate change and they think it's something has to be done, but they feel powerless. And do they have enough knowledge to actually understand what needs to change? So I hope that, universities can bring ideas to councils, but we do need a forum of engagement with the public to enable these ideas to get translated into ways of working that brings everybody along. Does that make sense?
That absolutely does make sense. And again, it's coming back to all these different things we need to tie in and having everybody kind of on board and involved. My next question is for Ryan, and this is something that's been echoed in the Q&A as well. We talked a lot about Manchester. How do Manchester's devolution powers allow them to push forward more sustainable policies and initiatives?
Yeah, it's a great question. So devolution, I think, created a great political platform, a great talking point. Christine has talked about regulation and law a lot. Devolution, in the sense of, and for Greater Manchester's climate change work, was really limited. There were very few new resources that Greater Manchester Combined Authority had access to, very limited new legal authority or regulatory authority that GMCA had. But it created a huge bully pulpit, a big microphone that the Combined Authority and politicians like Andy Burnham were able to use to bring people together to talk about these issues, create the kinds of everyday infrastructure that the other speakers have spoken about. And I think over time, that has allowed Greater Manchester to push for new devolved powers, and they continue to do so. So, for example, the B network, that was not something GMCA had the authority to do when
when devolution really started to gain steam in 2017, when the new mayor was elected, that was something they had to fight for much more recently with government. And there are other fights that they're having now about kind of what resources they need access to, what legal authorities they need access to in order to make other big changes. But devolution kind of as the starting point, I don't think had any real tangible, meaningful, concrete, didn't create opportunities for change to happen. It really was just a starting point for a wider conversation, and then that gave certain folks within Greater Manchester Combined Authority and politicians the kind of confidence to go and debate, argue with government for more power. And they're slowly getting some of those powers, but obviously need much more if all of this is going to come to fruition.
Absolutely, thank you. Our next question is coming from the audience, and I think it's mainly aimed at Christine, but anybody else, please feel free to jump in. We have a planning framework that looks at sites individually in terms of biodiversity and other factors, rather than just whether some field or a brownfield site, as to some extent we've got some greenfield sites that are quite monocultured compared to brownfield sites that have maybe been reclaiming themselves to some extent.
I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear that. It was breaking up. Could you repeat it, please?
Absolutely. So this is an audience question asking how possible or how feasible it might be for us to have a planning approach that looks at sort of development sites individually rather than simply categorizing them as brownfield or greenfield. The question asker has pointed out that some of our greenfield sites are actually quite monoculture fields, whereas some of our brownfield sites that have maybe started to reclaim themselves might have a higher degree of biodiversity in some ways.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not a planning expert, so I just want to point this out. My understanding is that sites are designated, and that designation is not changeable. But I believe when the individual plans go through, there can be cases made to change that classification. If there's anybody that's an expert in planning and I'm wrong, I apologize, but that's my understanding. So as our plan has put through, we have identified brownfield sites across the city for development, and they're all classed as brownfield sites. We have had discussions with people saying, well, this site actually is a greenfield site, but it's not used for greenfield, so why don't you build on it? But at the moment, we can't change that. That is my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that unchangeable designation does seem like one of these sticking points we maybe need to look at on a wider level. Tanzil or Ryan, do either of you have anything to add to this audience question? If not, then we can move on. So I have another question from an audience member. Please keep dropping these in the Q&A, by the way, everyone. Thank you to those that have already. Around how we get system change. And I think this is probably for all of our speakers. We're going to be able to bring different perspectives on this. So to what extent does a collection of individual policies kind of allow us to drive system change? And I appreciate that's going to depend a bit on the different policies that are involved. And to what extent do we actually need to address things like overconsumption and kind of wider structural aspects of the economy beyond sort of GDP-driven process to get real system change that can help us develop more sustainable areas? Let me know if any of that needs repeating. But would any of our speakers have any Absolutely, please do, Christine.
I'll start anyway. I do think we need to look at the way we use finance as a measurement for everything that we do. I mean, you only have to listen to the news, and everything is measured in how many millions of pounds we've wasted through a strike day, or how many millions of pounds it's worth if we can have a football match in our city. Or, I mean, these are all things that are good. It's just that the emphasis is always on the money and how much it's going to cost or not cost. And I think we need to start looking at what the value of these things is. And this goes into your mention of consumption. You know, is a greenfield site, which is probably not got as much monetary value until it's got houses on, but actually is the value of the greenfield site more important than the 600 homes you can build on that greenfield site? So I do think we need to have a discussion around how we value things, rather than just everything at the moment is measured in monetary and economic terms. So that's my starter for 10.
Thank you very much. Do either of our other speakers have anything to add to this answer? Or any?
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead. I'll add after you.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Christine just said. And we can think about it at the micro level as well. So if my partner and I have a child, and we're both of working age and both have jobs, and I decide, I'm going to stop working and take care of our baby. In economic sense, that's a bad thing. I'm taking away from GDP. But if I say, no, we're both going to work, and I'm going to hire a sitter or put a child in daycare, there's an economic exchange happening. So that's a good thing, without kind of thinking about the deeper ethical or moral implications of either decision. There are pluses and minuses of both, but when we only think about the economics of our decisions, we're really missing the picture. To the question of systems change being about a bunch of policies or something deeper, I think it's really both. We've spoken about cars quite a bit. We all know kind of Amsterdam is a car capital of the world. It didn't always used to be that way. There was a period in the 60s and 70s where Amsterdam looked a lot like cities in my country, the United States, in terms of the car usage. And there was this big political fight that mostly moms began, where their children were being injured by cars as the kids would play by the roadway. And they had this fight to say, we want cars gone. We don't want cars in our city. They didn't say we want to reduce car usage by 15%. They wanted systems change, and they fought for it. And that eventually led to new master plans in Amsterdam and other cities in the Netherlands, and led to strategies being developed. But it started with a political debate and movement. So I think systems change is about thinking about our leverage points, and policy strategy is a great leverage point for making change. But there's always something much deeper behind the leverage point, going not to the kind of incremental levels of change, but thinking about change at a fundamental level and using strategy as a kind of guidepost or a pathway for enabling that long-term change. But it's more transformational than incremental.
I'll just add one thing. I mean, I don't know if others have read this work by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, Black Swan, and who wrote about Antifragile. He talks about how minorities can end up changing the entire system. And if you look at throughout history, all great changes have been done not because 100% people really bought into it at that time, but there were, a good minority who really, had a very staunch belief in the need for change. I mean, you see this reflected in many different shades. Angela Davis talks about it. Martin Luther King talks about it. But in a sense, this idea that systemic change would be done through like a systemic, revolution down the line, I feel oftentimes if things are said in those terms, it puts people off from taking an immediate action, because it's sort of like this utopia that's going to come at one point through someone else's expense. And when that is all is good, we don't need to worry about it. I feel, again, I'm going to say that I feel like, at what point does it constitute a system change? That's a good question, because if everyone thought they were sort of like the last straw that broke the camel's back, if everyone had felt that way, that they're the ones who are holding back systemic change, then you'd actually have systemic change in any case, because everyone would feel compelled. But this idea that, I mean, going back to Ryan's point, I mean, I think we sort of like stuck with this idea of a homo economicus, this idea of, who are human beings? Where do they get value from? This whole, this big idea of an American dream of a front yard, white picket fence, the backyard, barbecue, 2 cars, a garage full of appliances that you're never going to use in your life. I have lived my fair share in the United States, and I'm always really amazed by everyone buying, a leaf blower. So, a street with 40 houses will have 40 amazing leaf blowers that get used once in every year. Even a small change in a neighborhood like that, where they say, you know what, we're going to collectivize, we're going to, share, we're going to create this, share pod that where we store stuff that we share across. I feel this sort of collectivizations, that's where I feel like a lot of change can happen. That is small, that is still the minority, but I feel it slowly starts to shift the narrative with which people value things. So people, visiting that neighborhood will feel a greater sense of belonging, or they'll feel something better that they don't appreciate or they don't get in their own neighborhood. And slowly that's going to have a ripple effect. So I'm a great believer in sort of like that everyday local action, which you saw that's what I was trying to really put forward through my presentation of how to instigate that at a local level by everyone. I saw Christine's hand for a minute, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry,
No worries.
You've just stimulated, a thought for me. I mean, as a local councillor, I have a lot of contact with my local residents. And I mentioned in my speech that we are reducing the mowing regime so that we're letting verges grow a bit wilder and have wildflowers in them. But I then get a post bag, and half of the people are saying, oh, it's great, you're encouraging wildflowers. And half of the people say, oh, the place looks messy. Get it cleaned up immediately. What are you doing as a council? It's messy. So we have that kind of dichotomy of people. And I see part of my role is to explain to the people, but we need to have the messy, and we have to move away from this image of perfect neatness and everything completely groomed, and allow a bit of wild in, because we need to do it. So there's an education in there as well, I think.
This reminds me. So it's the same way of how people think of what should a building look like, let's say. So there's this amazing architectural history book, just the name is escaping me, but he looked at sort of the history of architecture from fossil fuel perspective. And he showed that when you have abundance of fossil fuel, that's fine that you're building with concrete. That's fine that you're building massive. That's exactly what happened. You look at the structures done in the 50s and 60s, the Barbican Center, right? I mean, humongous ecological footprint, because you were not concerned. But now, why would you want, farmed timber, minimal impact? Because you're not living in the same world. So your response. So at one time, okay, it didn't matter if you were using more electricity. Everyone had a lawnmower, because at that point, maybe resource was not seen through that lens. But now you are living in a different world. You're already. It's not that you will be living in a different world, which is another point that I tried to make. That future that we talk about, that climate change future is already here. It's happening now. It's not something that's going to happen. So Of course, your desires need to shift. But having said that, I feel this is where we need that debate and conversation, where it's not about forcing this on those who want a trimmed garden, but to talk about the idea that, would you really want to cause this much catastrophic by collectively deciding as a nation of 7 million to trim your lawns? Or would you want to move away from that and be more responsible? I think because people don't make these causal links, because they don't see the connection between why. Once I feel like, there is so much goodness in people, once they see, they will choose what's really better. But it's most of the time, that's not how we talk about things. Again, as you said, look at the news and you see that everything is about how many quids is this making and how many quids is that making. So maybe those terms of conversation, as we change those through debates like this, if we talk about, human beings in different terms, then their desires start to shift, which is what I feel like, lays ahead of us, particularly, those of us in public sphere, those of us in policy making, those of us in, education, really.
Absolutely, thank you all. And those questions and those discussions are really what the festival debate is trying to get to at its heart, how we find things that everybody can move forward with. Before we move on, we've probably got time for one more decent sized question. I just want to address a quick note in the Q&A. The slides and the recording of this will all be sent out to all attendees after the event. But we've had quite a few questions in the Q&A and in the pre-submissions around transport. So really, if each of you could take a couple of minutes to just address, what does it mean for us to kind of have adequate and public transport that makes an obvious choice, or that makes public transport the obvious choice, sorry. And how do we kind of build active travel into that in a way that's sort of a win-win for the environment and for people, as something that's becoming an increasingly sort of polarizing debate? How can we have adequate transport that works for everyone?
Oh, well, I'll start and then I'll come back in if, I mean, I think I hope I put that across when I talked about transport. It's absolutely essential that we have the advantages of having roads that are primarily for walking and cycling and wheeling for those who need disability aids and things. We mustn't exclude anybody. Is that we have cleaner air for a start, which improves our health. We have less congestion for those that have to drive through, which is actually got an economic benefit, I believe. But we just have much more amenity, the streets. And if you visit many European cities, and Amsterdam is fantastic as well. I mean, I did a cycling holiday through Amsterdam and through Holland and Belgium, and it's transformational, really. I think we should send everybody there to see what a different city can look like, because it's phenomenal to see the different types of bikes and the different types of people that can get around. In my role, I often have people say, yeah, but not everybody can ride a bike. So what's the point of having cycle lanes? I get a lot of people saying, why do we need cycle lanes? Not everybody can ride a bike. They're not very useful. Why do we put them in? But actually, a lot of people can ride a bike. We just need different bikes, but we don't have them in this country yet, and we don't see them. So that there's different ways of using a bike, and I'm not going to say that everybody needs to ride a bike, and I acknowledge that some people won't, and that's fine. But the more people that can do it, the more people will be encouraged to improve their health outcomes. And getting children outside, walking to school, playing in the streets, improving road safety. I also said Sheffield has a terrible record on road safety. There's just so many advantages to having good transport. For me, it's a no-brainer, I'm
afraid. For me, the transition we need to make in the realm of transportation is enormous. And in most North American, European cities, this is a very broad statistic, but anywhere between 20 to 40% of carbon emissions are transportation related. So if we're going to create sustainable cities, we have to tackle this question. I think going back to our discussion on systems change, the starting point has to be our built infrastructure for transportation is not fixed. There's this lovely quasi-holiday called Parking Day that started in the United States to get people to imagine what it would look like to redesign our street system. We all just assume our streets are concrete, they're fixed, they're there for time in memoriam, but they're not. They can change, of course, and this Parking Day event is all about trying to take on-street parking and turn it into something else. Turn it into a space for a barbecue, for lectures, for bocce ball, whatever you want. But it's a way to kind of get people to recognize that our space that's been designated for public transit is not fixed. We can change it, and that enables us to create new infrastructures for cycling, for walking, for public transit, etc. To make those modes of transportation just the easy thing to do, rather than having to risk your life biking on a street where the road makes you feel not wanted. The other thing, again, going back to our discussion around systems change and finance, there's certain groups of people that greatly benefit from our existing transit system. So stepping out of transit into just housing, there's a study done by Dark Matter Labs, a kind of think tank, looking at what value do trees create for homeowners. If you live in a street that's tree lined versus a street that's not tree lined, is there an economic difference? And they found in London there was about a £7,000 to £10,000 difference in what your home was worth. Same thing is true. You might be familiar with the High Line in New York. It's a very fancy public park. And long story short, this public park was developed for about $170 million. The land that surrounded that park increased in value by over $3 billion. So in terms of our transit network, people that drive cars predominantly are essentially being rewarded for using cars because we're all incentivized to use cars. You don't have to pay to use the road network. But what if we had a different equation at play, where using a car was economically a burden and taking public transit was the option that was incentivized? That's kind of how I see this transition happening. We need to think about how do we make better options for the environment, for people's health and well-being, just the sensible thing to do.
I'll just piggyback on that, and I'll just add one more statistics. I mean, research has shown that tree-lined retail corridors actually generate 12 to 15% more than others. I mean, I think for powers that be, it has been put as a binary, as if going green is going to reduce GDP. It's going to be like, oh, we're going to be so much poorer in some ways. I mean, it's seen as it's like a binary. It's like as if it's a choice, and it's not. I mean, healthier people will live longer. You'll have your consumers for more, but for different things. So I think we need to one key thing is to ideologically step beyond this idea that choosing to transition, the just transitions, is a way of somehow diminishing value, particularly those values that are economic value. That's one thing. In terms of transport, if we go back to that, I mean, it's again this small scale changes and small scale incentivization of small scale infrastructural changes, which slowly can shift things. But I mean, this whole idea that Christian talked about, I mean, if we could radically take people to, let's say, 14th century cities, amazing cities, but everyone was walking. You go back to Sevilla and Cordoba in 8th century, and you'll see that great cities, a million people, and they're all walking with very, very minimal transportation infrastructure, because everyone is using the one that's already there at their feet. So again, I feel like crucially we need to transfer the debate as to whether we want to or not towards something like this is what we have to. And the thing that I feel like that it sort of already has become a memory, but think of COVID. A lot of cities use that moment to recapture, parking lots, parking spaces, a lot of the spaces that was not used. A radically different city emerged during COVID. And you could see, and Paris, for example, they reclaimed actually 33% of their public space. Maybe the statistics is wrong, but in a sense, it was used as a way to reclaim those public spaces as public use. So COVID really, I think, showed that, we can have this collective response to calamities in which we can reimagine cities differently. It's just that, do we want to get to a summer that is 40 degrees in Sheffield for 3 months until we make that change, or can we make that change before that happens? So I feel it's a question of when is there going to be a consensus that no, we can't just do things the way that it has been done, and it's not a worse off option. I feel that's consistently the messaging, is that it's going to be worse off, and it doesn't have to be. And that's an important, hopeful point, I feel like, to end on. We have never been so creative in entire human history. So I see no reason to not think that we'll work something out. But it's just that we really need to move fast.
Absolutely. And
yes,
ending with a hopeful message, I think, is really important. On that note, thank you very much to all of our speakers today. I'm going to pass you back over to Jake now, just to wrap up the event.
Lovely. Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, so thank you for attending today's Festival Debate event. I do really want to thank our speakers, Tanzil, Christina, Ryan, for their wonderful talks, as well as Fiona for chairing for today's event, which I thought you did an amazing job in doing. I hope you all enjoyed the discussion points for today. Even just from our three speakers, you can really see the diversity and the points of views that can be added to this debate. And I really hope you're able to take away what sustainable living means for yourselves and for where you live as well. Just a note on as well, I think it'll be briefly a question there. Slides will be shared as well as the recording for the event. For everyone who signed up for this, they'll be shared out afterwards, so you should be able to access and view them. So without further ado, I really hope you enjoy the rest of your days, and hopefully also maybe attend other festival events as well. You can check out the website, see what else might be of interest to you. So thank you once again, and so I'll see you all later. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.